Yu Yu Hakusho is one of the best animes I have ever seen. It's easily in my top 5. Actually, top 3. And there's multiple reasons as to why that is, but today I just want to focus on the very first episode of Yu Yu Hakusho and what I think is a perfect first episode. But before we do any of that, of course, as always, subscribe if you haven't subscribed, and if you already are subscribed, we thank you for keeping the Animen dream alive. So what does it mean to have an effective first episode? I mean, because it's basically a first impression with any show, whether it's anime or live action or anything. You never get a second chance to make a first impression. That's why it's so important that your first episode really nails it and really captures your audience. Some succeed, some don't. But in the case of Yu Yu Hakusho, it succeeds so well that it actually moves me to tears. Let me explain. So things start off right away with an interesting grab. It takes less than a minute for this show to catch your attention as we see the main character floating in the air and looking down at what appears to be himself, as the narrator actually lets us know that this is the main character and he's dead. Immediately you have my attention. I'm like, okay, so main character and he's dead. What? Already? That doesn't usually happen. I'm not saying this is the only case where it happens. I'm sure there are other shows, maybe even other animes, where the main character is already dead at the very beginning, but I can't think of any off the top of my head. If there are, though, let me know in the comments section because I'm curious. Now, rather than crying or being in complete shock that he's at a loss for words, our main character, Yusuke Urameshi, is really more just being exactly who you'd think he'd be if you've already seen this show. And that is pissed off, frustrated, a little confused, but ultimately is just like, what the hell? Yusuke then starts to try and think back. He tries to retrace his steps as he remembers what his day was like. And that's when we get to flashback to earlier events in the show. Now, normally, I hate when any story starts off with something crazy and then flashes back and has all these events that lead up to it so you can see how we got here. Because normally they take way too long to get back to where we were at the very beginning of the story. I think it's such a cheap way to grab your audience's attention and keep them there. It's lazy, it's a cop-out, it's uncreative. But in the case of Yu Yu Hakusho, it actually works. It's very different because it doesn't take too long to get back to where we were when it was revealed Yusuke's dead. He only flashes back to earlier that day. It's not like we had to go 10 years into the past. And this flashback is very effective at showing us more of Yusuke's character, because even though he's dead right away, that doesn't necessarily mean that we have to care. We don't know who Yusuke is. Why should we care that he's dead other than, I guess it's just sad somebody's dead? For all we know, he could have been a huge jerk that maybe deserved to die. Well, Yusuke was kind of a jerk, but he didn't deserve to die. And that's another thing that's so great about this first episode. Yusuke isn't shown to be some kind of saint. He's not shown to be some kind of Boy Scout. He's not shown to be some kind of great guy who just ran into a bit of bad luck, and so we should root for him and feel sorry that he's gone. No, Yusuke's a delinquent. He's a guy who likes to fight and beat people up. Doesn't mean he goes out of his way to beat up anybody, though, and that's another great thing about Yusuke's character. There's layers to this guy. He's not a stereotypical jerk. He's not a stereotypical delinquent. He only fights if you piss him off. And it's easy to not piss off Yusuke just as much as it is easy to piss off Yusuke. If you don't want to piss him off, just leave him alone. You leave him alone and he'll leave you alone. But if you get up in his face and you try to start something, Yusuke's going to be damn sure that he finishes it. But throughout this whole thing, we get to see other characters as well. And that's what makes this first episode really good, is that it's not just showing us Yusuke's character, but it's showing us the important people in his life and who they are like and why they're important to Yusuke, even if Yusuke won't outright admit it. And I love that about Yu Yu Hakusho, is that oftentimes, especially in the beginning, It's show, don't tell, which is one of the most fundamental rules of visual storytelling, which is what anime is. Don't tell us who these characters are and why they're important to Yusuke. Don't tell us who Yusuke is. Show us. And this episode does it. In fact, if you watch the show and you watch just the first episode, you might be surprised that there's not that much dialogue. But throughout Yusuke's day, he's at school and his longtime childhood friend Keiko pays him a visit and kind of scolds him, but it's in a way where you can tell that Keiko means well. She's not mean to Yusuke because she doesn't like Yusuke. She's hard on Yusuke because she likes Yusuke. And she wants Yusuke to do well, he wants him to stay out of trouble, he wants him to just be a hard-working student, like her. Because he can be, at least in Keiko's mind, he can be. And she wants him to succeed because she cares very deeply about him, and is also in love with him. But you know, either way it works. But of course, Yusuke being as hard-headed as he is, he's not really into the whole being a model student thing. There's a scene where a kid bullies another kid out of giving him his wallet, and the way he convinces that kid to give up his wallet is that he tells the kid with the wallet, hey, Yusuke's my cousin, so if you don't give me what I want, I'm gonna tell him and he's gonna find you. I love this scene because Yusuke ends up walking in on the conversation, and there are two different directions this could go. Either Yusuke could take the wallet for himself, or he could show a bit more of his more humane side. Instead of him taking that wallet and then keeping the money for himself or whatever and telling the guy, you know, don't try and use my name to gain things. Instead, he just wants to beat up the guy because it's like, how dare you try to use me to take somebody else's wallet? The kid even offers Yusuke the wallet, saying, here, take it, please don't hurt me. And Yusuke says,
you think I want your stupid money?
Such a good line because it shows Yusuke, again, he's not that kind of jerk. But he's not a saint either. He's fully prepared to beat this guy up, but he's not about to sink to his level and steal somebody else's wallet. In the same scene, one of the teachers shows up and immediately thinks that Yusuke's in the wrong, doesn't try to gain any context with the situation. It's great because it shows that even adults don't care about Yusuke. They think he's a troublemaker, they think he's a delinquent. They think that he's all these stereotypical things that you'd expect from somebody like that. All except for the principal, who actually, like Keiko, does care about Yusuke. It's in a bit more of a subtle way, kind of like father figure kind of way, but really it's more so just one of those people who are in the field of education that genuinely care about their students. But it turns out life at home ain't all that great either. When he gets home, there's his mother lying in bed, or, well, it's technically not a bed, but you know what I mean. Now, I believe in the manga, it gives more clear explanation that Yusuke's mom does a certain job to make her money, and it's not exactly a dignified job. But the anime never mentions anything about what she does for a living, probably because it's not that important. But as Yusuke sarcastically calls her Mother of the Year, you can tell she's definitely not Mother of the Year. And she seems to not really care all that much about her son. Like, he seems to be more of a hindrance, like a liability. So at this point, we've met characters that care about Yusuke, but are hard on him, and then we've met characters that seemingly don't care about Yusuke, even though they should. And then that's when we get to meet one of the best characters in the whole show, Kuwabara. Kuwabara tries to be, if I can make comparisons, the Vegeta to Yusuke's Goku, right? He tries to be the Bakugo to Yusuke's Deku. He tries to be his rival. Ah, that classic rival trope we love in these kind of animes. They exist, they're out there, and they can be a lot of fun, and Kuwabara really tries to be that. But this show plays with your expectations because Kuwabara is no match for Yusuke, even though Kuwabara has convinced himself that he is. Kuwabara is so sure that he could beat Yusuke in a fight. So much so that he challenges him over and over and over again and loses every time, and it's not even close. And it's here where we don't just see the playing of expectations on the classic rival trope. We also get to see Yusuke, for once in this whole episode, actually enjoy himself a little bit. It shows that Yusuke does like to fight. He gets a thrill out of it. Lots of people like that exist. Lots of people get a thrill out of fighting. There's something about it. That's why we have MMA. That's why we have boxing. And after that fight, that's when Yusuke starts to relax a little more. He's got to let out some aggression, so he's in a bit of a better mood than he was earlier that day. And I think that helps play into the next part of the episode. Because in the next part, as he's just walking around in the public, as a bunch of other people are, he runs into a little kid who's kicking around a soccer ball. This kid is doing something very dangerous, and Yusuke can see that. You shouldn't be kicking your soccer ball around when there's cars driving all over the place. Yusuke tells this to the kid, much like how he gets lectured by the adults. And the kid is immediately scared and doesn't like Yusuke because he's like a scary dude yelling at him. But again, this is where we get to see some of Yusuke's good side. Because I think in that moment Yusuke realizes, wow, I kind of sound like the adults who were pissing me off at school when I yell at this kid and tell him what not to do. So what does Yusuke do? He makes faces. And then he starts to do a silly dance to cheer the kid up. Once again showing Yusuke ain't your typical jerk. He has a good side to him, he really does. He doesn't really let it out all that much, but he's got one. Of course he then tells the kid, hey, here's your ball, but be safe, don't be kicking it around. Basically tells him what he said the first time, but in a much kinder way. I love this scene as well because, like I said, at first, he sounds like the very adults he can't stand. And Yusuke seems to realize in that moment that he's being kind of a hypocrite. So he makes up for it. He lets his tough guy act down for a moment to cheer this kid up. And then once again remind him, but kinder this time, hey, don't be kicking the ball around. There's cars driving, you could get hurt. But the freaking kid doesn't listen to him. Yusuke notices and says, well, fine, screw it, he can get run over for all I care. And what happens immediately after he says that? Kid kicks the ball into the middle of the street, tries to go after it, a car comes screeching forward, and Yusuke sees it, and Yusuke jumps and saves the kid at the cost of his own life. We're only halfway through the episode. Just halfway through the first episode, we get all the events that we need, all the information we need on the characters in this story, and it's all done in a relatively quick amount of time. They didn't have to span this whole thing across a whole season. It just took them 15 minutes. I think even less. So now that Yusuke realizes what happened, he's dead, that's when the Grim Reaper shows up. No, not that Grim Reaper. Not that one either, but that would have been really funny. Yes, there she is. Botan, Captain of the River Styx. Not your typical Grim Reaper, once again, the show playing with your expectations, but in a way that works. Botan offers a good contrast to Yusuke in this situation, because Yusuke is short-tempered and pissed and all these things, whereas Botan is a bit more happy, a bit more upbeat, has a longer fuse. These two play off of each other really well. But now that Yusuke is dead, you think, oh, well, now that Botan, the Grim Reaper, is here, she's here to take Yusuke away to the afterlife. But instead, she lets Yusuke stick around to see if the kid's gonna be okay. Turns out, yeah, he's gonna be just fine. He just got a few scrapes and bruises, nothing serious, which makes Yusuke pretty happy, and he says he has no regrets. Yusuke, fully ready to go to the next life, whether it's heaven or hell or whatever, Botan actually tells Yusuke, hey, you weren't actually supposed to die today. None of us would have predicted that you, given your nature and your personality, would have ever sacrificed yourself to save this kid you just met. Which is kind of funny, but also kind of messed up. Dang, they must have really thought low of Yusuke. So Botan actually tells Yusuke, hey, there's a way for you to come back. You could actually come back to life and basically get a second chance. Now, normally this is the part where the main protagonist would be like, yeah, sure, let's do it. I want to come back to life. I want a second chance. I'm not going to take my life for granted this time. Let's do it. What do I got to do? Yusuke's actually like, no, I kind of like being a ghost. I don't need to come back to life. What would I even come back for? Well, Botan, rather than telling Yusuke that there are people who care about him and are going to be sad that he's gone, she simply tells him, hey, go to your wake, and then I'll get back to you about your decision. So now Yusuke goes to his wake, and at first, it just seems like the students that are there just to get extra credit. Some are kind of laughing about the whole situation. Even some of the teachers are like, well, I'm glad that guy's dead. He was bringing the reputation of our school down. Yusuke is getting what he honestly expected. And then that's when he gets the unexpected. Because then we see the first heartbroken character, Keiko.
Yusuke. No!
Is she making all that racket for me?
Remember the girl I mentioned earlier that was hard on Yusuke because she cared? Well, here, she can't even stand. She's in tears because the man she loves is dead. Yusuke is shocked. And at first, I kind of thought, well, why would you be shocked? You should have known Keiko cared about you. And I think Yusuke did, but he didn't realize just how much Keiko cared about him. And in this moment, he's finally getting to see how much she cares. But it kind of doesn't matter because he's dead, so it's too late. Imagine if there was someone you cared so deeply about, someone you were in love with, but you never really knew if they felt the same. And maybe at one point you were kind of sure like they didn't feel the same. But then you do find out. But by the time you find out, it's too late. But it doesn't stop there, because then we see Kuwabara, his rival, and he is pissed. And in this scene, this is such a damn good scene, because Kuwabara basically goes through all the stages of grief in this one go. It's fantastic. I would love to describe it to you, but I really feel like you should just go watch this scene. You should watch the whole episode. You should watch the whole anime. But if nothing else, watch this scene and see how Kuwabara's character just goes through the different stages of grief in a way that's fast, but also natural. Again, the pacing is so freaking good.
You're supposed to be here for me.
And now at this point, Yusuke is just really shocked. He's at almost a loss for words. Like, dang, like, I didn't know I meant that much to Kuwabara. I always beat him up. And now he's pissed that I'm gone? He's pissed that the guy always beat him up is gone? I didn't know that to him. I was more than just that. Then we get to see the principal show up. And the principal is just sitting there feeling almost like he failed Yusuke.
Why didn't you stay? You could have made something great out of yourself.
This is someone who, once again, works in the education system and genuinely cares. People like that should never be taken for granted. There are so many teachers and principals out there that just see their job as just a job and they're just there to collect a paycheck. And they don't really care about the students. But sometimes you get one that does care about the students. And they are so wonderful to have. Because here's a guy that still believed that Yusuke, of all people, despite the reputation he still believed that Yusuke had all the potential in the world to make something of himself. And in that moment, the principal feels like he failed at his job. And he's not thinking, great, I'm gonna lose my job now, how am I gonna make money? No, he's thinking, I failed this student. How can I even call myself a principal? We see one more character truly grieve his loss, his mom, who's just sitting there looking like she's gone. The lights are on, but nobody's home. But it's not because she's been drinking, because she's a drinker. It's because her son, her one and only son, her only family, is dead. And she just starts crying. And Yusuke really doesn't know how to respond. You can see it in his face that he's starting to realize, holy cow, I had no idea that I meant this much to these individuals. So after all that, Botan comes back. And rather than being like, so have you made a decision or whatever, Yusuke just sits there and says one of my favorite lines in any anime I've ever watched. I'm not even gonna say it. Just listen.
Have you ever not known about something that seemed obvious to everybody else?
That line gets me every time. I said earlier in the video that this episode's so good that it moves me to tears. And it does. I watched this episode again just the other day, and sure enough, I was crying. And it's always that wake scene. I think for a lot of us, at certain points in our life, we can feel like our lives have no meaning. And we can feel like our lives hold no value to anybody else. So what's the point of us even being alive? We start to think to ourselves, if I were to leave today, would anyone care tomorrow? And sometimes we convince ourselves that nobody would care. So what's the point? Why bother? I might as well just disappear. And you could tell this to certain people in your life, and they'd probably be really shocked that you would think that, confused even, heartbroken, of course. Because to them, that's not the case. Yusuke is saying in that moment, if you can't already tell, that he didn't realize what was so obvious to Keiko, to Kuwabara, to his mom, to the principal. Yusuke's life mattered. Yusuke's life meant something. It had value. It was worth having. Yusuke's life was worth living. Not because of who he is to himself, but because of who he is to others. I'm not trying to get too mopey, I'm not trying to get too emotional, I'm not trying to get too sentimental, I'm not trying to get too deep in this video with anything, and I'm not trying to get that personal either. But like I said, so many of us, myself included, we can sometimes feel like, what's the point? None of this matters, so why bother? But I know if I were to tell all this to the people in my life that care about me, they would think I'm crazy. And they would think, how could you not know something so obvious? And if I were to say, what's that obvious thing I don't know? They would tell me, your life matters. Your life is worth living. Your life means a lot to me. Life can be really hard, and it can just flat out suck a lot of the time. But I'm telling you, Yusuke, though his life would suck a lot of the time, even he still had people in his life that made his life worth living. And to them, that was obvious. But to Yusuke, it wasn't obvious until he was already dead. After all of that, Yusuke agrees, hey, I do want to come back to life. Because now I see what I could be leaving behind, and I don't want to leave that behind. I want to go back to it. So Botan says, all right, then let's get to work. And they fly away to the spirit world to get things started, and that's where the episode concludes. Whew. Okay, so do you see why this is a great episode yet? If you don't, then just please go watch it, because I feel like my explanation really doesn't do it justice. I feel like I just mostly summarized the episode while giving you a little bit of detail here and there as to why these things work, why they're so good. My explanation really doesn't do it justice. Go watch this episode for yourself. And if you like it, keep watching more. If you made it to the end of the video, thank you so much. And also, I want to take a second real quick at the end of this video to just thank all the people that subscribe to us over the years, and especially in 2024, because our channel grew so much from the beginning of the year to the end, reaching nearly 20,000 subscribers when we started at 550 was insane. And thank you so much, because when I see something like that and when I see this channel grow, it makes it feel like, you know, this channel does have some value. This channel and these videos we make, these fun, silly anime videos that Travis and I make, have value. They mean something. Kind of like how Yusuke realized that his life means something. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.
Thank you for watching. If you're not subscribed, be sure to do so by clicking here. If you are subscribed, we thank you for keeping the Animen dream alive. Be sure to check out our other content here and here. For even more content, be sure to check out the rest of our channel and be sure to follow us on Twitter by clicking the link in the description below. I'm Felicia, and I'll see you next time.